The moment the single dad collapsed into the very last seat on the plane, sweat on his brow and exhaustion carved deep into his face, something invisible shifted in the air, like fate quietly holding its breath. He didn't notice it yet, but a few rows ahead, a woman whose name ruled boardrooms and billion-dollar deals was about to look back and freeze, as if the past had reached out and grabbed her heart without warning. Before the story pulls you deeper, take a second after this opening moment. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and unseen miracles, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Ethan Carter had not planned to take that seat. In truth, he hadn't planned much of anything lately. Life had reduced his days to survival. Wake up before sunrise, prepare his daughter Lily for school, work double shifts at a warehouse that smelled of oil and fatigue, then come home to a silence that felt heavier than noise. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier after a sudden illness, leaving Ethan with a toddler, medical bills, and a grief that never quite loosened its grip. He sold his car, his wedding ring, and eventually his pride, asking for help he once thought he'd never need. This flight was his last attempt at starting over, a job interview across the country that promised just enough to keep Lily fed and warm. Missing it would have meant the end of hope he could barely afford to carry. He boarded late because Lily had cried at security, clinging to his neck as if she sensed how fragile everything was. By the time he reached the cabin, only one seat remained, squeezed between strangers who looked anywhere but at him. He apologized with his eyes, settled Lily against his chest, and exhaled a breath he felt he had been holding for years. The hum of the engines felt like a lullaby, and for the first time in months, Ethan allowed himself to imagine a future where he wasn't always one step away from falling apart. Several rows ahead sat Victoria Langford, a woman whose name carried weight in financial circles and glossy magazines. She was known as a visionary billionaire, a self-made success story who never looked back. First class had been full, so she had reluctantly taken a seat in economy, irritated and distracted by emails and market reports. Her life was measured in numbers, projections, and control. There was no room for sentimentality, no space for mistakes. Yet as the plane prepared for takeoff, a sound drifted forward, a soft, familiar laugh, followed by the rustle of a child settling down. Something about it pierced through the armor she had built around herself. Victoria turned slightly, almost absent-mindedly, and her eyes landed on Ethan. The world seemed to slow. The sharp lines of her certainty blurred as recognition struck like lightning. Years ago, before the skyscrapers and private jets, before the headlines and power, there had been a different version of her, a struggling young woman with more dreams than money, more fear than confidence. And there had been Ethan Carter, the man who once saved her when she had nothing. Back then, Victoria had been a broke college dropout sleeping in her car, surviving on coffee and hope. One rainy night, her car broke down on a deserted road. No phone battery, no help in sight. Ethan, younger but already carrying the quiet strength he still had now, stopped his old pickup truck and offered help without hesitation. He paid for the tow she couldn't afford, bought her a meal, and gave her a place to stay for a week while she got back on her feet. He never asked for anything in return. When she left to chase her ambitions, she promised herself she would never forget him. Life, however, had a way of burying promises under success. Now here he was, worn down by life, holding his daughter as if she were the only solid thing left in the world. Victoria's throat tightened. The numbers on her screen no longer mattered. All she could see was the man who once believed in her when she had nothing, now quietly carrying a weight no one else seemed to notice. As the flight moved forward, Ethan remained unaware of the storm of emotions unfolding nearby. He focused on Lily's breathing, steady and soft against his chest, and the ache in his back from years of labor. He thought about the interview waiting for him, about how he would answer questions with honesty and humility, about how he would smile even if rejection came again. He told himself that being strong didn't mean never breaking. It meant standing back up when no one was watching. Victoria watched him for a long time. Memories flooded her mind. His kindness, his patience, the way he spoke about responsibility and love even when he had little to give. She realized with a sudden clarity that all her success had been built, in some small but crucial way, on that moment of compassion years ago. And now fate had placed him back in her path, not in a boardroom or a charity gala, but in the cramped reality of economy class, where truths were harder to ignore. When the plane landed, the cabin erupted into the usual chaos of bags and bodies. Ethan prepared to leave quietly, as he always did, slipping back into the world without being noticed. But before he could stand, an attendant gently touched his shoulder and asked him to wait. Confused and anxious, he felt the familiar fear of something going wrong. Lily stirred, her small hand tightening around his shirt. Victoria approached, her presence commanding yet trembling with emotion. She looked at Ethan with eyes that held gratitude, regret, and resolve. In that moment, power meant nothing. Wealth meant nothing. Only humanity did. She arranged for Ethan's interview to be expedited, personally vouched for his character, and ensured that temporary housing and childcare were waiting for him by the time he stepped off the plane. She didn't do it as a billionaire showing generosity, but as a human repaying a debt long overdue. Ethan didn't fully understand what was happening until days later, when the job offer came, followed by opportunities he never imagined possible. For the first time since his wife's passing, he felt the ground steady beneath his feet. Lily laughed more. He slept without fear. Hope, once fragile, began to grow roots. Victoria, too, was changed. She began funding quiet programs focused on single parents, not for publicity, but for healing. She learned that the true measure of success wasn't how high you climbed, but how many hands you remembered reaching for you on the way up. Just before the ending of this story, we want to ask you something important. Please comment below one word that describes how this story made you feel, or share a moment when kindness changed your life as the years passed. Ethan often thought about that flight, about how close he had been to giving up, and how a simple act of kindness from long ago had returned to him multiplied. Life never became perfect, but it became meaningful. And sometimes, late at night, when Lily was asleep and the world was quiet, he would smile at the thought that even the smallest good deed could echo across time, waiting for the right moment to come back home. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness never truly disappears and that second chances are real, please like this video, share it, and stay with us by subscribing. Your engagement tells us these stories matter, and so do you.